Mexico is going through one of the most delicate periods in recent decades. Between power struggles, an internal war that seems to have no end, trade tensions with the United States, and an economy that shows signs of weakness, the country is at a crossroads, and almost no one is talking about it the way they should. Today on Bello Mundo, we dive behind the tourist headlines and reveal the other side of Mexico, a territory marked by chronic violence, controversial political promises, billion-dollar mega-projects, and a people who resist amid the chaos. Want to understand what's really going on there? Then stay with us because this story goes far beyond tacos and sombreros. Number 1. The War on Drugs and Fragmented Cartels. We begin with what is perhaps the darkest point in this story: the war on drug trafficking, an internal conflict that has been going on for almost 20 years, with civil war numbers and scenes that look like something out of a movie, only with real victims. Since the Mexican government declared war on the cartels in 2006, more than 350,000 people have died. Another 100,000 have simply disappeared. And the question that won't go away: has it done any good? What we have seen is the opposite. When the big cartels began to be dismantled, dozens of new groups emerged, smaller, more violent, and more unpredictable. It's like cutting off the head of a hydra. Several more grow in its place. Today, the two most feared names are the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known by the acronym CJNG, led by the feared El Mencho. They control vast areas of Mexico, and where they do not rule alone, they fight for territory with local gangs using bullets, kidnappings, and extortion. In many cities, the state has already lost control. There are places where criminals make the rules. They charge protection fees, control trade, and even carry out justice with their own hands. Meanwhile, the government oscillates between militarized repression and peace slogans such as abrazos, no balazos, loosely translated as hugs, not bullets. But so far, no one has found a real solution, and the violence continues unabated, as if the country were at war without ever having declared one. Number 2. The Jalisco countryside, the Ranch of Silence. March 2025. A group of volunteers was doing what the government rarely manages to do: searching for missing people in rural Mexico. But what they found in the state of Jalisco was beyond their worst nightmares. On an isolated farm known as Rancho Izaguirre, the volunteers came across a terrifying scene. 3 industrial ovens, dozens of abandoned suitcases, burned clothes, personal belongings scattered everywhere. More than 400 pairs of shoes, as if each pair told an interrupted story. The images spread across the country. The place came to be known by many as a field of silence, a place where victims were taken never to return. According to preliminary investigations, the area was used as a center for disposing of and concealing crimes committed by groups linked to drug trafficking. The authorities, cautious, avoided using stronger terms. They said the ranch was actually a kind of training center, where the criminal group tested the loyalty of its new members and eliminated those who refused to cooperate. But what was found there, according to experts, was clear evidence of atrocities. Human remains were found, and many are still being analyzed to determine who they were and how many there were. For Mexicans who have missing loved ones, the news came as an emotional bombshell. Fear has taken on a new face, and the question now is, how many other places like this are there across the country? In a scenario where families are already walking around with shovels and sticks looking for clues, this discovery only reinforces the pain of an entire nation that is still waiting for answers. Number 3. Colima, the most dangerous city in the world. In the first topic, we talked about the war between cartels, and in the second, we saw the horrors that this war leaves behind. Here, you will understand where all of this explodes on a daily basis. Colima, a small town on the Pacific coast with less than 300,000 inhabitants, has become the most extreme portrait of violence in Mexico. In 2023, it reached an alarming number: 140 homicides per 100,000 people. That's right, 20 times higher than the global average. The result? For the second year in a row, Colima was ranked the most violent city in the world. And what brought this place to this point? The answer lies in the port of Manzanillo, the largest in the country and the key to the trafficking of chemical inputs arriving from Asia, mainly China. These products are used in the production of illegal substances that then cross the border into the United States. Controlling this port has become a matter of survival for the cartels. On one side is the Sinaloa cartel, on the other is the Jalisco New Generation cartel. The dispute has turned the streets of Colima into urban battlefields, stray bullets, ambushes, and killings in broad daylight. Worse still, fear has spread to those who have nothing to do with crime. Merchants close early, schools suspend classes, and residents live in forced silence, interrupted from time to time by bursts of gunfire. Colima has become a symbol of a violent country, but it is not alone. Just to give you an idea, in 2023, 7 of the 10 most violent cities in the world were Mexican. The crisis is no longer localized. It is now national. Number 4. Trade war and tariffs with the United States. While facing internal crises and heavily armed cartels, Mexico still has to dance to the tune coming from Washington. Yes, because when the United States sneezes, Mexico catches a cold. And the relationship between the two countries is far from smooth. Despite the trade agreement that unites Mexico, the United States, and Canada, the famous USMCA, guaranteeing free trade, the truth is that any change in mood from its northern neighbor can turn into a nightmare for the Mexican economy. In 2018, for example, the then U.S. president threatened to impose tariffs on all Mexican products if the country did not curb immigration. The result? Troops at the border, diplomacy in overdrive, and Mexico swallowing hard. Now, in 2025, the movie seems to be repeating itself. The U.S. government announced tariffs of up to 25% on steel, aluminum, and other Mexican products, alleging trade rule violations. It was like throwing a bucket of ice on an economy that was beginning to perk up with foreign investment, especially nearshoring, which had been attracting factories to Mexican territory. And it doesn't stop there. Mexico wants to ban genetically modified corn from the United States, which has angered American producers. In addition, the United States is constantly complaining about Mexican energy policy, which prioritizes state-owned companies. All of this adds up to an unstable scenario in which the Mexican economy is walking a tightrope, trying to please its powerful neighbor, defend its interests, and at the same time keep its internal engine running. But that rope has been stretched for a long time, and when economic tension is combined with headwinds from the international market, the result can be even more worrying. Number 5. Risk of recession and inflation challenges. This is exactly the mood that has taken hold there in recent months, a country trying to weather the storm, but with the boat rocking hard. After years of high inflation, Mexico now faces a new specter, that of recession. Citizens who were already feeling the pinch at the grocery store and the gas station now also have to deal with the fear of losing their jobs. After the storm of the pandemic came the hangover, and it hit the average Mexican hard in the pocketbook. First came rising prices, more expensive groceries, sky-high gas prices, shrinking wages. In 2022, inflation hit almost 9%, the highest in more than 2 decades. And the central bank had to react with everything it had. It raised interest rates to over 10%, one of the highest rates on the planet. The result? Inflation began to slow down, but with it came a brake on the economy. In 2025, Mexico entered a difficult period. Economic activity was falling, consumption was stalling, and investments were disappearing. The country even flirted with technical recession, that moment when the economy shrinks for 2 consecutive quarters. And the warning signs are already flashing. International banks say that a full-blown recession seems inevitable. Several factors explain this tense climate. Last year's drought devastated agriculture and drove up food prices. Trade tensions with the United States, as we saw earlier, also undermined the confidence of many investors. What's more, with the end of the public works boom and the U.S. slowdown, sectors such as construction and exports have lost momentum. Even with the super peso appreciated and reserves on the rise, what people feel in their daily lives is hardship. Fewer jobs, more uncertainty, and purchasing power still far from what it was before the pandemic. For the new president, balancing this equation will be a delicate juggling act. How to revive the economy without letting inflation run wild again. Meanwhile, Mexicans continue to count their pennies and pray they have enough money to make it to the end of the month. Number 6. New president, old problems. After plunging into a security crisis, economic tension, and trade wars, Mexico is now trying to turn the page, but with the same political protagonists. At the end of 2024, the government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, came to an end. He was a charismatic figure who left office with sky-high popularity and a pile of challenges. During his 6 years in office, AMLO promised a 4th transformation, focusing on the poorest and fighting corruption. But he failed to curb the rise of violence. There were almost 190,000 murders during his administration. It is as if the country had experienced an informal, open war. And now the person taking on the responsibility of trying to fix this mess is Claudia Sheinbaum, a former mayor of Mexico City, a scientist by training, and the first woman elected president in the country. She represents continuity, but promises to set a new tone. While AMLO said hugs, not bullets, she has already declared zero impunity as her motto. Claudia was elected with the direct support of the former president and is expected to maintain most of his social programs and state-owned companies. But the mood has changed. The people want quick answers, especially in the fight against crime, at the borders, and in the faltering economy. In addition, she takes office with the United States, pressing for results on security and trade. The dilemma is clear: how to toughen the game without breaking with the peacemaker style she inherited. How to maintain progressive rhetoric while the country calls for a firm hand. If Mexico's recent past has been turbulent, the future is still a foggy road. But now Claudia is at the wheel, and the whole world will be watching every turn. Number 7. Controversial megaprojects, the Maya train and the airport. And since we're talking about the former president, if there's one thing AMLO liked more than public speeches, it was building grandiose projects. Among his greatest achievements, 2 stand out, both for their size and controversy: the Mayan train and the Felipe Angeles International Airport, or AIFA, for those in the know. Promised as symbols of sovereignty and development, they ended up kicking up dust, both literally and politically. The Maya train was announced as the salvation of southern Mexico, a nearly 1,000-mile railroad connecting tourist spots such as Cancun, Tulum, and Merida. However, the tracks also ran through environmental reserves, underground caves, and indigenous communities that were not exactly consulted. Environmentalists called the project ecocide, and the budget ballooned from around 120 billion pesos to more than $28 billion. Even unfinished, the former president rushed to inaugurate some sections as his administration was coming to an end. And he didn't stop there. The AFA airport was born out of presidential stubbornness. He canceled an airport started by the previous administration and decided to build his own, right in the middle of a military base. Modern? Yes. Full? Not so much. In the first few months, all you could see were photos of empty terminals and memes calling the place a white elephant. Today, traffic has improved, but it remains well below capacity. These projects have left lessons. The main one? Looking good on paper is not enough. The real challenge is to deliver something that actually works. And in Mexico's case, the debate over these mega projects is far from over, because in addition to white elephants, there is corruption. You know, the kind that is obvious when each project begins, because that's what it's all about. Number 8. Corruption and institutional impunity. If organized crime is already frightening on the streets, what can be said when it also wears a uniform or a suit and moves freely through the corridors of power? That's right. In Mexico, corruption has become almost a parallel institution. And we're not just talking about the way of getting things done or bribes paid at red lights. We're talking about billions of dollars, collusion with cartels, and impunity that borders on the unbelievable. According to Transparency International, Mexico ranks among the worst in the world, 31 out of 100, tied with much poorer and more unstable countries. One of Latin America's biggest economic engines, mired in mistrust. One statistic that reveals the drama. Only 5% of crimes committed in the country result in convictions. In other words, 95% of criminals, whether on the streets or in government offices, simply go unpunished. Then there are cases like that of Genaro Garcia Luna, former Secretary of Public Security, arrested in the United States for links to the Sinaloa cartel. The man who was supposed to fight the drug traffickers was actually profiting from them. Cases like these undermine any hope for real justice. And even with politicians making speeches and promising a crusade against corruption, the practical results remain modest. The result? A people tired of seeing dilapidated hospitals, abandoned schools, and potholed roads, all while corruption continues unabated, disguised as authority. With no punishment at the top, the message is clear. It pays more to steal than to work. And that, my friend, is fuel to keep Mexico trapped in its own dark cycle. Number 9. Poverty and social inequality. Amid all the security and corruption problems, we cannot forget a persistent shadow: the poverty and inequality that affect millions of Mexicans. Even with an economy among the 20 largest in the world, almost half of the Mexican population still lives in basic hardship. In 2022, 36% of Mexicans were living in poverty, about 47 million people. Of those, 9 million lived in extreme poverty, going hungry or without a place to live. The inequality, then, is jaw-dropping. The richest 1% accounts for almost 30% of the national income. Meanwhile, half of Mexicans survive on less than 10% of the pie. To make matters worse, the difference is also geographical and racial. The south of the country, where most of the indigenous population lives, has poverty rates above 60%. The north, which is more industrialized, has much lower figures. The pandemic has added fuel to the fire, and even with the economic recovery and recent social programs, such as an increase in the minimum wage and welfare benefits, the situation is still critical. More than 50 million people live without regular access to health care. Half of the workforce is informal. And when you live from hand to mouth, any unforeseen event becomes a tragedy. Between luxury skyscrapers and communities without sanitation, the contrast is brutal. Mexico is advancing in technology, exporting cars and airplanes, but still has millions who cook with firewood. This is the social abyss that the country must face if it wants to ensure that no one is left behind. Number 10. Impacts on the population, tourism, and international image. While Mexico tries to balance so many issues, from security to the economy, it is ordinary citizens who really feel the pinch. In many regions, daily life has become synonymous with caution. Families avoid certain times of day, children go to school with improvised escorts, and in areas dominated by criminal factions, there are even informal curfews. For many people, the only way out is to migrate, either to another city or across the border. But those who stay live with a daily contrast: vibrant culture on one side, fear and frustration on the other. Even so, resistance is emerging: search groups, united neighbors, voices that insist on fighting. It is civil society refusing to be silenced. And what about tourism? Mexico remains one of the most popular destinations in the world. Cancun, Tulum, and Los Cabos are still full, but all it takes is a shooting near a hotel to shake the image. Abroad, the name Mexico still appears more in crime headlines than on the covers of travel magazines. TV series, movies, and politicians reinforce the stigma. The challenge now is to show the brilliance without glossing over reality. So, did you already know this side of Mexico? Which of these topics shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments. If you liked it, leave a like, share it with those who still only see the Mexico of postcards, and subscribe here at Bello Mundo. Thank you very much for joining us. See you at the next stop.